The man in the tailored burgundy shirt moved through Lafayette Park like he owned the shadows themselves. Kim Taehyung had just left a meeting where he'd threatened a man's life with nothing more than a whisper and a smile. Violence was a language he spoke fluently, calculated, efficient, emotionless. His neck tattoos crawled up from his collar, dark art on golden skin, a warning to anyone foolish enough to look too long. But then he heard it, a sound that stopped him mid-stride. Crying, quiet, devastated, the kind of sobs that came from someone who'd learned to break in silence. On a bench beneath the sprawling oak trees sat a black woman in a blue silk dress that had seen better days. Her hair fell in sleek, dark waves past her shoulders, her posture rigidly perfect despite the tears streaming down her face. She clutched a crumpled paper in trembling hands, staring at it like it held the death certificate of everything she'd ever loved. Every instinct Taehyung possessed screamed at him to keep walking. Caring was dangerous. Involvement was weakness. He'd built his empire on emotional detachment. But something about her, the way she held herself together, even while falling apart, pierced through armor he'd spent decades constructing. He sat down beside her. "Tell me what broke you," he said quietly. She looked up, startled, eyes meeting his, and in that moment, Kim Taehyung made a decision that would destroy them both before it could save them. Clara Morrison didn't know why she was telling this elegant stranger her life story. Maybe because he'd asked with genuine curiosity rather than pity. Maybe because she had nothing left to lose. Maybe because sometimes you need to confess your failures to someone who doesn't know enough to judge you for them. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "You don't need to hear this." "I asked," Taehyung said simply. He stayed perfectly still on the bench, hands clasped between his knees, giving her space. "Keep going." So she did. The words tumbled out like a dam breaking, 3 years of silence and shame finally finding voice. She told him about Morrison Manufacturing, the company her father built from nothing, how she'd taken over after his death with a Harvard MBA and enough determination to move mountains, how she'd doubled revenue in 3 years, how industry publications called her a rising star, how she'd finally felt worthy of her father's legacy. Then came the accusation, $3 million missing, falsified investor documents, her signature forged on transfers she'd never authorized. The investigation was swift and merciless. The prosecutor was a shark named Marcus Reeves, who treated her like she'd personally stolen from orphans. The media convicted her before the trial even started. Her board turned on her. Investors fled. The company was sold for parts. "I was innocent," Clara whispered, staring at the eviction notice in her hands. "My CFO framed me, but by the time anyone might have believed that, it was too late. The damage was done." She laughed bitterly. "Now I make coffee at 5 a.m., enter data from noon to 6, and clean offices until midnight. 3 jobs, and I still can't afford a studio apartment in Koreatown. I'm being evicted in 2 weeks. Her voice cracked. "The worst part, I've started to believe I deserved it, that maybe I was foolish or weak or somehow guilty without meaning to be. I can't trust my own judgment anymore. I can't believe in myself." Taehyung's chest constricted. Morrison Manufacturing. He remembered that contract, a simple job 3 years ago. A client wanted a competitor's patents, needed the company destabilized. Taehyung had made a call, paid Marcus Reeves $500,000 to pursue aggressive prosecution against the CEO, create chaos, facilitate acquisition. He'd never asked if the target was guilty. Guilt was irrelevant to business. Clara Morrison, this devastated woman in the blue dress, was the target from that file, the collateral damage he'd never bothered to consider. The guilt hit him like a blade between the ribs. He'd spent his life not caring about the people his empire crushed. He'd viewed them as abstractions, necessary casualties of ambition and profit. But here she sat, not an abstraction, but a brilliant woman whose life he'd methodically destroyed. Her father's legacy, her reputation, her confidence, her ability to trust herself, all because he took $500,000 and never asked questions. Clara was watching him, eyes red but somehow still dignified. "I don't know why I told you all that. You probably think I'm pathetic." "No," Taehyung said quietly. His mind was already calculating, planning. "I think you're surviving something that would have destroyed most people." He stood, pulled a business card from his wallet, one of the legitimate ones. "I run several businesses. I need someone with strategic insight, someone who understands corporate structure and negotiation." Clara stared at the card. "I make coffee. You have an MBA from Harvard and ran a manufacturing company for 3 years. You're wasted making coffee." He met her eyes. "Think about it." He walked away before she could refuse, his jaw tight with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. Guilt. Crushing, devastating guilt. And beneath it, an impossible determination. He would rebuild what he'd destroyed, even if she never knew the truth of what he'd done. The morning rush at Sunrise Cafe was dying down when Clara noticed him. The man from the park, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, back when she could afford rent. Kim Taehyung moved through the cafe like he owned it, though his eyes were scanning for something, for her. Clara's pulse quickened. She'd spent 2 days trying to forget their conversation, embarrassed that she'd unloaded her failures on a complete stranger. She turned back to wiping down tables, hoping he'd take his coffee and leave. "Americano, black." His voice came from directly behind her. She forced a professional smile and headed to the counter. Her coworker Jenna raised an eyebrow. The man was clearly out of place among the college students and construction workers who normally frequented the cafe at 7 a.m. Clara made his drink with shaking hands, acutely aware of her stained apron and the way her cheap flats squeaked on the linoleum. When she handed him the cup, he pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Your job offer," he said simply. Clara blinked. I didn't think you were serious." Taehyung opened the envelope and placed a business card on the counter between them. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering. Executive assistant position, $120,000 per year. The number made her dizzy. She was currently making $31,000 combined from all 3 jobs, working herself into exhaustion for poverty wages. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "No mistake." Taehyung's expression was unreadable. "You mentioned you have an MBA and corporate experience. I need someone with strategic insight, not just administrative skills. I run import-export businesses, real estate holdings, investments." He paused. "You're overqualified for most assistant positions. You're probably underqualified for this one, but I'm willing to take the risk if you are." Clara's hands trembled as she picked up the card. The address was in Koreatown, a high-rise she passed on her bus route. "Why me?" Something flickered in Taehyung's eyes, an emotion gone too quickly to name. "Because when someone is drowning, you throw them a rope. You can say no," he lifted his coffee cup, "but you'd be foolish to." Pride surged in Clara's chest. She wanted to tell him she didn't need charity, that she could handle her own problems, that she wasn't some project for a wealthy man with a savior complex. But pride didn't pay rent. Pride didn't feed you. Pride was a luxury she'd lost 3 years ago, along with everything else. "I'll take it," she heard herself say. Taehyung nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Monday, 9 a.m., don't be late." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Clara, bring the version of yourself that ran a company, not the one who's convinced herself she deserved to lose it." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her standing in the middle of the cafe with a business card that felt like both a lifeline and a trap. Behind the counter, Jenna whistled low. Whistle? Girl, who was that? Clara stared at the card, her reflection visible in its glossy surface. I have absolutely no idea. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't have seen, was Taehyung sitting in his car outside, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, relief and guilt warring in his chest. She'd said yes, she'd taken the rope. Now came the hard part, pulling her back to shore without her ever discovering he was the one who'd pushed her into the water. Clara's first week at Taehyung's office felt like stepping into an alternate reality where she hadn't spent 3 years convinced she was a failure. The penthouse suite overlooked Los Angeles from the 32nd floor, all glass walls and minimalist furniture that screamed quiet wealth. Taehyung's operation was exactly as he'd described: import-export logistics, commercial real estate portfolios, investment holdings in tech startups and manufacturing. On the surface, everything appeared legitimate, but Clara had run a company long enough to recognize the shadows between the lines, the clients who paid in cash, the meetings that happened after midnight, the way Taehyung's associates looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear that had nothing to do with business acumen. She didn't ask questions. She needed this job too desperately to jeopardize it with curiosity. On her third day, Taehyung dropped a commercial lease agreement on her desk, 60 pages of dense legal language for a warehouse property in Long Beach. "Tell me what's wrong with this," he said without preamble. Clara's hands trembled as she picked it up. She hadn't analyzed a contract in 3 years. The last time she'd reviewed legal documents, it had been evidence in her own prosecution, her signature forged on transfers she'd never authorized, every page a nail in the coffin of her reputation. She swallowed hard. "I might not be the best person for this." Taehyung leaned against her desk, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but somehow patient. "Why not?" "Because the last time I reviewed contracts, I apparently missed a $3 million embezzlement scheme happening under my nose," Clara said bitterly, "so my track record isn't exactly stellar." "Or," Taehyung said quietly, "someone deliberately hid it from you, and you're punishing yourself for being betrayed." He tapped the document. "Read it. Trust yourself." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to explain that trusting herself had led to devastation, that confidence was a luxury she couldn't afford, but something in his steady gaze made her open the file. The words swam at first, legal jargon that felt foreign after years of making coffee and entering data. Then muscle memory kicked in, her Harvard education, her years running Morrison Manufacturing, the analytical mind she'd buried beneath shame began to wake up. She read for 20 minutes while Taehyung waited in silence. Finally, she looked up. Clauses 7 and 12 contradict each other regarding liability for structural damage. The escalation schedule increases rent by 8% annually, which is predatory for commercial space. And the termination clause is weighted entirely in the lessor's favor. They can break the lease with 30 days' notice, but you need 6 months. She hesitated. It's a terrible deal. You'd be locked into an exploitative agreement with no exit strategy. Taehyung's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "Exactly right." He straightened. "Fix it. Draft counterproposals for those 3 clauses. Have them ready by tomorrow." He walked toward his office, then paused at the door. "Clara, you didn't miss anything 3 years ago. Someone made sure you wouldn't see it. There's a difference between being incompetent and being betrayed. Learn it." The door closed behind him. Clara sat frozen, staring at the contract in her hands. Something had just cracked in her chest, the smallest fissure in the wall of shame she'd built around herself. For the first time in 3 years, she'd trusted her judgment, and she'd been right. She didn't see Taehyung through the glass wall of his office, watching her with an expression of fierce satisfaction and devastating guilt. Every time she reclaimed a piece of herself, the knife of his betrayal twisted deeper. He was rebuilding what he'd destroyed, and falling in love with her in the process. 3 months into working for Taehyung, Clara had become indispensable. She'd renegotiated 5 major contracts, identified 3 bad investments before they could hemorrhage money, and streamlined his logistics operations to save 17% in overhead costs. The defeated woman from the park had been replaced by someone who walked into boardrooms with her shoulders back and her voice steady. Taehyung watched the transformation with equal parts pride and agony. On a Tuesday evening, Clara was reviewing his investment portfolio, a routine audit he'd asked her to conduct quarterly, when a line item made her breath catch. TK Holdings acquired Morrison Manufacturing Assets, March 2024. The patent portfolio, her father's patents, the innovations that had made the company valuable in the first place. Her hands went cold. She hadn't thought about Morrison Manufacturing in months. The grief had dulled to background noise, replaced by the consuming work of rebuilding herself. But seeing the company's name, her father's legacy reduced to a line item in someone else's portfolio, ripped the wound open again. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. At midnight, she opened her laptop in Taehyung's conference room. She'd been working late enough that he'd given her after-hours access, and started digging. Old financial records, news articles, court documents she'd been too devastated to review properly 3 years ago. With her restored analytical skills and the confidence Taehyung had painstakingly rebuilt, she saw what she'd missed before. The timeline was wrong. The evidence against her had appeared too perfectly, too quickly. Forged documents surfacing within days of each other, building an airtight narrative of guilt. The prosecution had been unusually aggressive for what should have been a civil matter. Marcus Reeves, the prosecutor, had treated her case like she'd committed murder, not white-collar crime. Someone had wanted her destroyed specifically, methodically. This wasn't opportunistic fraud by her CFO. This was coordinated character assassination. She was surrounded by printouts and pulled up financial databases when Taehyung found her at 2 a.m. He'd returned to the office to retrieve files for an early meeting and saw the conference room lights burning. He froze in the doorway. Documents covered the table. Morrison Manufacturing, Marcus Reeves, her old case files. "What are you doing?" His voice came out rougher than intended. Clara looked up, and Taehyung's chest constricted at the expression on her face. Her eyes were bright with something he hadn't seen before, not just confidence, but purpose, fire. "I'm clearing my name, Taehyung. I was innocent. I've spent 3 years believing I deserved what happened to me, that I was somehow guilty without meaning to be. But look at this." She spread out documents. The evidence appeared too fast. The prosecution was too aggressive. The timeline doesn't make sense unless someone orchestrated the entire thing. Her voice cracked with emotion. "Someone wanted me destroyed specifically, methodically. This wasn't opportunistic fraud by my CFO. This was coordinated character assassination." She should stop her, should redirect her attention, should find a way to slow this investigation before it led to the truth, to him, to Marcus Reeves, to the $500,000 contract that facilitated her destruction. Instead, he heard himself say, "What do you need?" Clara blinked, surprised. "Resources, access to financial databases I can't afford, maybe a forensic accountant who can trace offshore accounts." She hesitated. "I know I'm asking a lot." "You're asking for justice. That's not too much." The guilt was a knife between his ribs, twisting with every breath. "I'll get you whatever you need." The smile that broke across Clara's face was devastating. "Thank you. God, Taehyung, thank you. I feel like I'm waking up after 3 years of being dead." He watched her return to the documents, energized and purposeful, and felt something break inside him. This was what resurrection looked like, someone clawing their way back from destruction, reclaiming their power in their truth. He'd given her this, the confidence to fight, the resources to investigate, the belief that she deserved justice. And when she found the truth, it would destroy them both. But watching Clara fight back, watching her become powerful again, he couldn't take that away from her, even knowing it would eventually lead straight to him. The late nights became their ritual. Clara would work past midnight, chasing leads in her investigation, while simultaneously managing Taehyung's business operations. He'd bring Korean takeout from his favorite spot in Koreatown, and they'd eat at the conference table, surrounded by contracts and case files. "Teach me something," Clara said one night, pointing at the Korean characters on the takeout containers. Taehyung raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because half your phone calls are in Korean, and I'm tired of not knowing if you're closing deals or ordering someone's execution." His laugh was surprised and genuine. "Jasinggam," he said, pointing to her. "Jasinggam, confidence. That's what you have now." "What's the word for workaholic boss who never goes home?" Clara shot back. "That would be jipchuk," Taehyung replied with a slight smile. "Jipchuk, obsession." She made him laugh more than anyone in his organization dared to. She'd observe his meetings and afterward mimic his most serious associates with uncanny accuracy, the way Director Kim cleared his throat before disagreeing, how Mr. Park checked his watch exactly 3 times per hour. Taehyung found himself smiling at his phone when she texted him observations. "Your 3 p.m. appointment definitely has a crush on you. She's worn the same perfume to 3 meetings. Also, she's embezzling. Check the Singapore accounts." She was always right. The night everything changed, Clara had just closed a renegotiation with their largest shipping contractor. She'd identified redundancies in the logistics chain and restructured the entire contract, saving Taehyung $2 million annually. When she walked into his office with the signed documents, her eyes were bright with triumph. "Done," she announced, "and they're happy about it because I found ways for them to save money too. Everyone wins." Taehyung stood slowly. "Dinner. Now. We're celebrating." The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. Clara arrived in a midnight blue dress that Taehyung's assistant had delivered to her apartment that afternoon with a note, "For client meetings, TK." She'd known immediately it wasn't for clients. Over wine, with the city glittering below them, Clara's composure finally cracked. "I forgot I could be this person," she said quietly. "Strong, smart, valuable. I spent 3 years convinced I was fundamentally broken, that I'd failed at the only thing that mattered." She met his eyes. "You gave that back to me." Taehyung's throat tightened. "You always were that person. You just needed someone to see it." Their hands touched across the table, tentative at first, then her fingers laced through his with a certainty that made his chest ache. The kiss happened in his car, parked in the restaurant's garage, desperate and inevitable, 6 months of tension shattering like glass, Clara's hands in his hair, his fingers tracing the curve of her spine through silk, 3 years of loneliness and 6 months of rebuilding colliding into something neither of them could control. In his penthouse, with the city spread below them like scattered diamonds, they made love with an intensity that felt like salvation and damnation at once. Clara's whispered confessions against his skin, "I didn't think I could feel this again," and Taehyung's hands memorizing every inch of her, like he was trying to deserve her through touch alone. Afterward, she lay in his arms, tracing the tattoos that crawled up his neck. "You saved my life," Clara whispered. Taehyung held her closer, feeling the words like a blade. "You saved yourself," he lied. "I just watched." She fell asleep against his chest, peaceful and whole, and trusting him completely. Taehyung stared at the ceiling, drowning. He loved her, truly, devastatingly, completely loved her, loved her competence and her strength and the way she'd clawed her way back from destruction, loved her laughter and her brilliant mind and the way she looked at him like he was something more than the monster he knew himself to be. And he was the reason she needed saving in the first place. The guilt was suffocating. Every touch felt like theft. Every moment of her trust felt like another betrayal piled on the original sin. But he couldn't let her go, couldn't confess, couldn't risk losing the only thing that had ever made him human. So he held her while she slept and made a silent promise to the darkness. He would give her everything: justice, vindication, the truth about her enemies. Everything except the truth about him. The break in Clara's investigation came on a Wednesday morning. She'd spent weeks following financial trails with the forensic accountant Taehyung had hired. No questions asked, just a quiet "whatever you need" and a team of investigators who worked with the discretion of people accustomed to secrets. David Chen, her former CFO, the man who'd sat across from her in board meetings, who'd reviewed every financial statement, who'd expressed such convincing shock when the embezzlement allegations surfaced. The investigators found his offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, $3.2 million deposited in increments over 18 months, almost exactly what she'd been accused of stealing. But it was the emails that proved everything. Correspondence between Chen and board member Patricia Wilcox, recovered from a backup server Morrison Manufacturing's IT department had maintained even after the company was sold. Clara read them with shaking hands, 3 years of doubt and shame crystallizing into cold, hard vindication. "We need Morrison out. She's too competent, too beloved by the investors. They'll never approve the patent sale with her in charge. The embezzlement angle is cleanest. I can create the paper trail. You handle the board. Once she's gone, we can push the sale through. TechVantage is offering $8 million for the patents alone. Make sure the prosecutor goes hard. We need her completely discredited. No possibility of return." Clara's vision blurred with tears, not of sadness, but rage. They destroyed her deliberately, methodically, while she'd blamed herself for 3 years, convinced she'd somehow failed or been weak or deserved the destruction. They'd been counting their money. She burst into Taehyung's office at 2 p.m., barely knocking. He was on a phone call in Korean, but disconnected immediately when he saw her face. "I can prove it," Clara said, spreading documents across his desk with shaking hands. "I can clear my name. Look, Chen's offshore accounts, the falsified timestamps, the emails between him and Wilcox planning the whole thing." Her voice cracked. "They framed me. They actually framed me, and I have evidence." Taehyung's eyes scanned the documents, his expression carefully neutral. But his blood ran cold when he reached the emails discussing legal pressure and aggressive prosecution. The prosecutor's name, Marcus Reeves, appeared multiple times, references to outside assistance and facilitation. His firm's letterhead was carefully absent, but he knew. He'd been that outside assistance. The $500,000 he'd been paid had funded Reeves' aggressive campaign, had created the legal pressure that helped seal Clara's fate, while Chen and Wilcox executed their plan. "This is incredible," Taehyung forced himself to say. His throat felt tight. "You did it." "We did it," Clara corrected, eyes shining. "You gave me my resources, the investigators, the confidence to even try." She laughed, the sound breaking with emotion. "God, Taehyung, do you know what this means? I can go to the district attorney. I can clear my name. I can prove I was innocent." She threw her arms around him, and Taehyung held her, memorizing the feeling of her trust, her joy, her body against his. Because when she learned the truth, and she would eventually if she kept digging, she would never touch him again. "I couldn't have done this without you," Clara whispered against his neck. "You believed in me when no one else did, when I didn't believe in myself. Taehyung's arms tightened around her. You always deserve to be believed. The truth sat like poison on his tongue. He'd helped her find evidence against Chen and Wilcox, but he was part of the conspiracy, the invisible hand that had made their plan succeed, the outside pressure they'd purchased to guarantee her destruction. Clara pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "I love you," she said simply. "I know we haven't said it yet, but I do. You gave me my life back." The words should have filled him with joy. Instead, they felt like a sentencing. "I love you too," Taehyung said, and meant it with every broken piece of himself. He loved her enough to help her find justice, and he loved her enough to know that justice would eventually destroy them both. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary afternoon that should never contain life-destroying revelations. Taehyung was in a meeting with associates from his shipping operation. Legitimate business for once, nothing that required Clara's discretion or deliberate ignorance. She'd stayed in the office to finalize a contract for a commercial property acquisition in downtown LA. She needed the Anderson file. Taehyung had mentioned it was in his personal cabinet, the wooden filing system he maintained for physical documents, despite the digital age. Old habits, he'd explained once with a slight smile. Some things feel safer on paper. Clara had full access now. Key codes, locked drawers, his personal office. 8 months of proving herself trustworthy, of becoming indispensable, of being loved. She unlocked the cabinet without hesitation, flipping through labeled folders. Real estate, commercial, logistics, international, legal, current, and then, tucked in the back, legal, archived. Her fingers hesitated. She was looking for Anderson, but curiosity made her pull the archived folder forward. Old cases, old business, nothing that should concern her. The file labeled Morrison Manufacturing Legal Action made her heart stop. Her hands numbed as she opened it. The first document was a contract dated 3 years ago. Legal consultation services, $500,000. The client name was redacted, but the target was clear: Morrison Manufacturing. Destabilization and acquisition facilitation. The emails beneath made her vision blur. From Kim Taehyung to Marcus Reeves, Esquire. Date March 15, 2022. Client wants Morrison Manufacturing destabilized for acquisition purposes. Need aggressive approach. What do you recommend? Reeves' response: criminal prosecution of CEO creates maximum chaos, minimum cost. Shifts focus from corporate maneuvering to personal culpability. Public conviction more valuable than legal conviction. Taehyung's reply: embezzlement angle strongest. Push the DA. Timeline. The correspondence continued. Strategy sessions, payment schedules, updates on the prosecution's progress. Reeves reporting: DA's office pursuing aggressively. CEO's reputation destroyed. Board turning against her. Company will be forced to sell within months. Taehyung's response: excellent. Keep pressure constant. And then, dated 8 months later, a different tone. From Marcus Reeves to Kim Taehyung. Date November 3, 2022. Regret to inform you of error in Morrison case. New evidence suggests CEO was innocent, framed by CFO and board member. Our legal action contributed to wrongful destruction of the target's life. Recommend no further such operations without verified guilt to avoid liability. Clara's hands shook so violently the paper rattled. She forced herself to read Taehyung's response. Noted. Send final invoice. Consider our contract complete. That was it. No horror, no remorse, no acknowledgement that they'd destroyed an innocent woman's life. Just business concluded, invoice paid, contract complete. Clara's vision tunneled. The office spun around her. She was going to sick. She was going to scream. She couldn't breathe. The door opened an hour later, or maybe it was 10 minutes. Time had stopped meaning anything. Taehyung walked in already speaking. The meeting went well, we should be able to... He stopped. Clara was sitting at his desk, the file open before her. Her face was a mask of devastation and rage, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Taehyung's world collapsed in the space between one breath and the next. Clara, you did this to me. Her voice was steady despite the tears, cold as winter. You destroyed my life. He didn't insult her by denying it. Yes. You hired Marcus Reeves. You paid him $500,000 to prosecute me. You told him to push for criminal charges, to destroy my reputation, to make sure I was ruined. Her hands clenched on the desk. And then, what? You felt guilty? So you decided to play savior? To fix your mistake? Taehyung's throat was too tight to speak. Every word he could say felt inadequate, insufficient, too late. Answer me! Clara's voice broke. Was I a project? Penance? Your chance to feel less like a monster? It started that way, Taehyung forced himself to say. I didn't recognize your name when we met. When I realized weeks later what I'd done to you. His voice cracked. The guilt nearly destroyed me. Clara laughed, and the sound was jagged glass. Good. I don't want your guilt. Clara's voice shattered the silence. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against marble. Do you understand that? I don't want your fucking guilt or your penance or whatever this was. She gestured wildly at the office, at the 8 months of her life she'd spent here. I loved you. I trusted you. I thought you were... She couldn't finish. The betrayal was a physical thing, crushing her chest, making it impossible to breathe. Taehyung stepped forward instinctively. Clara stepped back like he'd pulled a weapon. Don't! Her voice was steel and broken glass. Don't you dare touch me! His hands fell to his sides. Clara, was any of it real? Her eyes burned into his. The job? The respect? Teaching me Korean and bringing me dinner and telling me I was brilliant? Was any of it real, or was I just your rehabilitation project? All of it was real. Taehyung's voice cracked on the words. Every moment, every word. Clara, I love you more than I've ever loved anything. You made me feel human in a life where I'd forgotten how. Stop. Clara's hand shot up. Don't you dare make this about your redemption. You don't get to turn your guilt into love and expect me to absolve you. I'm not asking for absolution, Taehyung said quietly. I know what I did is unforgivable. Then why? Clara's voice broke completely. Why hire me? Why help me? Why make me fall in love with you when you fucking knew, that this would destroy me all over again? Taehyung's composure finally shattered. Because I'm a selfish bastard who couldn't stay away from you. Because watching you come back to life was the only thing that's ever mattered to me. Because I told myself I could give you everything. Justice, vindication, love, and maybe you'd never have to know the worst part. That you were the worst part? Clara laughed bitterly. That the man I loved was the reason I needed saving? Yes. The word was barely audible. Clara grabbed her bag from the chair, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the leather. You know what the worst part is? Not that you destroyed me 3 years ago. You were a stranger then, a criminal doing criminal things. I can almost understand that. She looked at him with eyes full of devastation. The worst part is that you let me love you. You let me trust you. You watched me rebuild myself and fall in love and believe I was finally safe, and you said nothing. I know. Taehyung's voice was hollow. I told you that you saved my life, Clara whispered. I said those words to you, and you knew you were the reason it needed saving. I know. You don't get to love me, Clara said, and each word was a blade. "You don't get to feel human because of me. You destroyed me before you loved me, and that's unforgivable. You're right about that. So congratulations, Taehyung. You finally got something right." She walked to the door. Every step felt like moving through water, like her body might collapse before she made it out. "Clara," his voice stopped her at the threshold. "For what it's worth, you were never broken. Not 3 years ago. Not when I found you. They broke your circumstances. I broke your circumstances. But you," his voice cracked, "you were always whole, always brilliant. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have." Clara didn't turn around. "You're wrong. You gave me one thing I didn't have before." She looked back at him, tears streaming down her face. "The ability to hate someone with my whole heart." She left. The door closed with a quiet click that sounded like the end of the world. Taehyung stood alone in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his crime, the files that had built his empire and destroyed the only person who'd ever made him want to be better. The city glittered outside his windows, indifferent and eternal. He'd finally understood something fundamental. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some wounds you have to carry for the rest of your life, not as penance, but as the price of who you chose to be. He'd destroyed her, then loved her, then destroyed her, and there was no redemption for that. 6 months passed like a slow exhale after holding your breath for years. Clara used the evidence to clear her name publicly. The district attorney reopened the Morrison manufacturing case within weeks. David Chen and Patricia Wilcox were convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. The trial made headlines. Tech executive framed by own CFO. 3-year fight for justice ends in vindication. Clara's testimony was devastating and precise, the brilliant strategist finally given the platform to dismantle the people who'd destroyed her. With settlement money from the civil suits and investors who remembered her original vision, Clara launched Morrison Technologies, a consulting firm specializing in protecting small businesses from the corporate predators she'd survived. Within 3 months, she had 12 clients. Within 6, she was featured in Forbes, the executive who rose from the ashes. She was powerful again, confident again, whole again. Taehyung watched from a distance. He'd withdrawn from most criminal operations, liquidating the darker holdings, building legitimate enterprises. Not redemption, he knew better than to believe he deserved that, but perhaps less harm. Perhaps a way to exist in the world that didn't require destroying innocent people. He read every article about Clara's success, watched video of her speaking at a business conference about resilience and corporate ethics. She was magnetic, commanding, everything she'd been born to be. He told himself that watching her thrive was enough, that her success was his only possible penance. Then, on a Wednesday evening, his assistant buzzed. "Ms. Morrison is here to see you." Taehyung's world stopped. "Send her in." Clara walked into his office in a cream suit, hair pulled back in the sleek style she'd worn when she ran her father's company. Every inch the executive she was born to be. She moved with a confidence that made his chest ache. Not the tentative resurrection he'd witnessed, but something fully realized and earned. "Clara!" He stood, uncertain. "Sit," she said, calmly. He sat. Clara placed a folder on his desk. "I'm consulting for Apex Holdings. They're negotiating a major deal with your real estate division. We're going to be working together." Taehyung's eyes searched hers. "You don't have to do this." "I know," Clara said across from him with deliberate composure. "I spent 6 months hating you. I still hate what you did. I may always hate that part of our history." The words landed like stones, and Taehyung accepted them without flinching. But, Clara continued, I also spent 6 months realizing something. You broke me, but you also showed me I was never actually broken. You gave me the space to remember who I was. She paused. Yes, you did it out of guilt, but the respect was real, the opportunities were real, and the love was real. Taehyung's throat tightened. Clara, she interrupted, I don't know if I can forgive you completely. I don't know if we can ever be what we were, but I know that pretending you don't exist doesn't work, and I know that the man who hired Marcus Reeves isn't the same man who sat with me at 2 a.m. reviewing contracts, who believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. She leaned forward slightly. So here's what I'm proposing. We work together, professionally. We see if I can trust you in small ways before attempting big ones. We acknowledge what you did while also acknowledging who you've become, and we see if two broken people can build something honest from the ruins of lies. Taehyung stared at this extraordinary woman who'd survived his worst and become stronger. Why? Because you're not the only one who needs redemption, Clara said quietly. I need to prove I can trust my own judgment again. I need to see if I can love someone who hurt me without losing myself. I need to know if forgiveness is cowardice or courage. She extended her hand across the desk. Deal? Taehyung looked at her hand, steady, certain, offering him something he didn't deserve, a chance. Not absolution, but possibility. He took her hand. Her grip was strong, confident, real. Deal. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was better. It was real. Two people who'd harmed and healed each other, choosing the difficult work of rebuilding trust, brick by brick. No guarantees, no promises that love would be enough, just the honest acknowledgement that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is against your own history. Outside the window, Los Angeles glittered with possibility and danger, indifferent and eternal. Clara and Taehyung sat together in his office, beginning again, this time with truth.